All right, everybody, welcome to season 3 of Melanin Minds, empowering Black women creatives in the comic book and manga space. Today, I have a very exciting guest. She is a novella author, has written, what is it, 4 awesome stories. I've only gotten to read 2 so far, but I'm getting there. I'm working my way through. And I was really, really excited to read. I'm really excited to have her on. And so, if you would definitely welcome Tatiana Obey. I have to do it. So it's, so yeah.
Uh,
uh,
Thank you for having me on.
Thank you for joining me. Um, so the of course this season we have switched gears, and the topic of this season is kind of more culture. Um, for the season. So we're going to be asking a lot of questions about, how culture influenced you in writing your books and stuff like that. And I know for people this might be strange because technically I interview people who write comic books and manga. And so you're the first like novella author that I've had. Like everybody else, even if they don't write comics, they're in the comic industry in some way. And so you're our first like novella author on here. But I still feel like it fits in a sense,
Yeah.
even
Well,
just given like the topic of your books and how they're still kind of in that same like fantastical world, something that you could totally see as a comic, because I could totally see Sister Samurai specifically as a comic book.
yeah. Oh man, hopefully it happens one day, and then I'll be able to keep things on theme for you.
I hope so. I would love to reread it as a comic book. I definitely would. But excuse me, sorry. One thing, I'm gonna let you introduce yourself as well, real quick, so people can really get to know you, and then we can dive into the more on topic questions.
Sure. Hello everybody. My name is Tatiana Obey, and since we're talking about heritage today, the last name is not spelled as you see it. It's kind of Creole, Nigerian, French mix, which is why it's all kind of mangled. but um, but think about Beyonce, right? It's Beyonce, not Beyonce.
Even though everybody calls her Bay.
And I write badass characters slaying dragons. I write in the fantasy realm, and I have 3 books with an anthology out. So my most recent published book is Sister Samurai, this beautiful cover here.
Mhm.
And then I have a completed duology. So I have those books here too, which is Bones to the Wind and Dragging Your Bones. And they are both in the fantasy realm, where this one's more anime inspired. The other one's more like fantasy, kind of for the Game of Thrones fans.
Yeah, I think that's the other reason I thought it fit, because it is still like anime inspired.
Yeah.
And I have the Dragon in the Wind. I need to get the other one so I can read that before your other book comes out next year.
Well,
My
hopefully,
gosh,
cross my fingers.
so much catching up to do. But the first thing before we really get into it that I really want to talk about is those chapter titles. Girl, those chapter, I was like, okay. Oh, okay. I'm loving the pop culture musical references here. So where did that idea come from? Because I need to know.
Yes. And we're talking about Sister Samurai. This is the one
Yes.
that has titles in in the chapters, and one of the it's heavily Afro Samurai inspired, but there's also like the Moondog, Samurai Champloo in the mix. And what's really in common about all those properties is the music.
Mhm.
They have such definitive soundtracks. And so in the book, there is a link to the playlist, and each chapter corresponds with a song in the playlist. So some of the songs, like I'm sure a lot of people will recognize, I wanted it like having playing in people's head as they read the chapter, like, oh, I know exactly, I know exactly what that is.
Oh, yeah. I really love that. I was like, okay, I can get with this. Like, but yeah, it's like, okay, Beyonce, I got a little, for the Beyonce songs that I knew. Uh I got a little bit of the Beyonce kind of just bopping in my head. Here we go. As this beautiful black woman is walking through town just kicking butt and taking names.
Yes.
Like, but I enjoyed the book so much. And
Oh.
It was really good.
Yay!
So now we get on to the cultural side of things here. And again, I got to reach all the way up here. So first off, can you share a little bit of your cultural heritage and background and how it influences your work? And then two-parter question, can you also share some specific examples of your cultural background influencing a particular project that you've worked on? And of course, we don't have to stick to just Sister Samurai. This just happens to be the book I read first.
Of course. So let's tackle that first question. So, we always say that Black people aren't a monolith. So let's kind of first talk about my roots and what my culture heritage is. I'm from Dallas on my mom's side, so with folks out from East Texas. And I'm from Houston on my dad's side with folks out from Louisiana, specifically Abbeville and Lafayette. And I mean, that stereotype of light-skinned Black folks from Houston. Yeah, I'm one of them. So
I don't know anything about that one, actually. I've never heard
it.
No. I've never.
There's on Insecure. I don't know if you've seen that.
From Houston?
Yeah.
That is new to me. I promise you, I've never heard that one.
There's a whole community of us, and specifically because around my grandparents' generation, a lot of Louisiana people fled to Houston. And at least I know specifically in my family is because race relations and the KKK in Louisiana was really bad. They were destroying and killing a lot of people. So they were like, okay, we got to get out of here. And so because of that, there's a huge Louisiana population in Houston. So so a lot of, Creole food, Zydeco. So those things that you kind of, a lot of people would relate to Louisiana, New Orleans. There's a huge population there in Houston, and that's where my dad's side of the family comes from.
Oh, wow. I learned something new. The more you know.
Yeah. So, my family, we've celebrated Juneteenth for generations. While it's a new holiday for some people, I come from, the people who have celebrated it for generations since they've been freed. And, these are the same people who have founded colleges and community organizations and churches all across East Texas. So, I come from stories of Black folks who allied with the Comanche during the Civil War in order to keep their land, and they are still on that land to this day. I come from stories where, only one day a week, Black people were allowed to be in the Texas State Fair. You could only go one day a week. You could only travel unseen in the tunnels downtown because Black people were not allowed to be seen, or, traveling every day across buildings where you know that those side doors were for colored folks, and they still exist in Dallas to this day. So yeah, so I come from family reunions and barbecues and crawfish bowls and Zydeco and watermelons, red Texas dirt. And the funny thing is, growing up, the first question that I got growing up, it wasn't what's your name? How are you? It's where are your people from? It's what are you mixed with? And it's kind of a shame that I'm such a product of this land that it doesn't even recognize me. But primarily because Texas does not recognize its own history. It doesn't even know its own history. So, I am really grateful to, for example, Beyonce's project, Cowboy Carter, for how it reveals, reclaims, recontextualizes, and kind of innovates the country music genre, which has a lot of erasure. So in that same vein, I want to try and use my own cultural heritage to kind of reveal, to reclaim, to recontextualize, and further innovate the fantasy genre. I want to challenge what this genre could be, through the lens of my experiences, my perspectives, and my history. Because I truly believe that fantasy, should be limited by our imaginations.
I totally agree.
Yeah. And so to get to the second part of the question, what's an example of how I've used my cultural background to inspire a particular project? So I am going to talk a little bit about Sister Samurai. And I would say that my cultural background has inspired all of my books, but in very different ways. But for Sister Samurai, I really wanted to see my family and my friends represented in the fantasy genre. Like, I wanted to see us as the heroes of our own stories. Because, at least currently in publishing today, we are enjoying like a lot of stories with Black characters at the center of them. But especially in epic fantasy, which is the genre that I write, you see the characters tend to be more African coded. So, for example, you have like Children, Blood and Bone by Tomi Adeyemi, or you have The Rage of Dragons by Evan Winters, Ray Bear by Jonah Efueko. So all these books are very heavily African inspired. And while I enjoy these stories, and these stories are very important, as an African American, it wasn't enough to just see myself in fantasy. I also wanted to see the way I talked. I want to see the way I walked. I want to see the way that I moved through the world in these fantastical settings. So Sister Samurai, I use anime as a trapping to tell a very Black woman story. And you have a Black lady samurai speaking AV, Ebonics, and slaying demons, and that could be Buck. So I just really wanted to write this love letter, kind of this moment of celebration and love, like all wrapped up in a story of healing and peace.
I absolutely love that, because it is true. While we are definitely getting a lot more Black centered stories, we are also getting a lot of African centered stories, which is also really great, because we don't get to see through that lens. We're seeing African characters written by African people, or even at least Black people who know a little bit about the culture and how it actually works. But then we have that thing again, whereas African Americans, we're kind of not seen in that case, because yes, we have heritage from Africa in most instances, but we have a completely different culture as from being born and raised here.
Yeah.
Like, even for like people like me, I'm only on my dad's side second generation American born. My dad was born here. My grandparents were not. My grandparents are both Caribbean, both from two different islands. And so that plays a small part into my heritage, but then still growing up here really changes even the way I associate with that culture, because I didn't like grow up around, like, by the time I was really even old enough to remember stuff, my grandmother was already back in Antigua. And I don't see my grandfather or my like aunts and uncles a whole lot. And so while I love that part of my culture very much, and I've always been trying to learn things about it for my entire life because I'm proud of it, there's also the fact that I didn't grow up knee deep in it, and the fact that I have a whole nother side of the family that isn't like second, third generation. We've been here in America since the slave trade. So like,
and that's real. Like, we have such a diversity in our culture, but we don't see that in our stories, and that's a shame.
Yeah, it's either we go straight African with it, which again is great to see, or it's this one dimensional, well, this is how all Black people in America are. No, even within Black culture, there are different cultures depending on where you grew up, how you were raised, your parents, all that stuff. And people don't realize the multitude of dimensions there are within our culture.
Yeah.
And so, I agree with you so much. I want to see all of that.
Yeah. And it's like, I want to see it all.
Right. And that's why we write, guys. So, how do you approach the balance between honoring tradition and embracing innovation when it comes to your creative process?
So I think my creative process specifically, because I write fantasy, but I often write secondary world fantasy, which is worlds that are completely made up and have no basis in our real world. So it's not portal fantasy or contemporary fantasy. It's very much like Game of Thrones and Lord of the Rings, where none of those countries or none of those places really exist or have existed. And because of that, I'm always forced to confront the question, what is Blackness? Are these characters who look like me, are they Black? If they have no history of slavery, or if they don't live in a society where prejudice and racism is along racial lines. So is it based solely on physical attributes? Is it a shared history, culture, belief systems that we've developed over time because of or in spite of our circumstances? So, I feel like obviously this is a question that us within the culture are always asking ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't really think it has a very straightforward answer because cultural identity isn't always kind of a set in stone type of thing. But it is something that I definitely am always playing with in my works. So for example, in a Forging of Age duology, like I made everything up. I took bits and pieces of inspiration and kind of crafted my own culture and world out of them. I created my own ethnicity with their own physical attributes, but I also gave the characters very Black stories that resonated with me. Um, I crafted the world in a way to kind of reflect the coming of age experiences of a Black woman growing up in America. So it's a harsh world, it's a world of scarcity. And yet, despite all that, you still got to come of age in it. Like, we still got to grow up in this. And so, in these characters, trials and tribulations, like I see myself in many ways. And I think that fantasy, in general, all speculative genres are mirrors that we can simultaneously both honor tradition, but also innovate what stories are possible and what stories that we can tell.
But yeah, I agree. I like things set in realism and set in our world, and I like things set in completely fantastical made up worlds. Like I like seeing a Black woman who's just an amazing samurai going around and kicking butt and taking names in a completely different world that's not ours.
Yeah.
Because it's one of those things that shows, hey, this is something you can pretend to be, just like other people get to pretend to be that. They get to have that same escape. You deserve that escape as well.
Yeah. And I remember it was such like a big controversy when, I forgot the actor's name, but the Black elf that was cast in Lord of the Rings. And they were just like, oh, and it's just like, guys, this is fiction. Elves can be any color. Like,
Or
why
the
can't we
recent
have
drama with
this?
Yasuke.
Yasuke, who is an actual historical figure in
Right,
Japanese history.
right.
And it's just like, yeah, like they can't conceive of us as something greater. And it's like, why?
I said it before. I think this is like season one. I was talking to somebody. I was like, the problem is that we're not a part of their fantasy.
Exactly.
So if we get included in it, now they've lost the fantasy element because they don't want to see us there.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
their escape from us. So they can continue to live in their bubble of honestly racism.
Yeah. And it reminds me of the criticism that's lost toward, Shauna Rice Bridgerton, where,
Mhm.
it very much is a pastiche. It's a fantastical space with its own rules. And it's saying
Mhm.
that, yeah, no matter what color you are, you can be like these high class societies just looking for romance. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Right. How do you see your cultural background as a source of strength and inspiration in your work?
So as I said before, I write badass characters slaying dragons, but most often than not, those characters are women. I'm definitely a product of growing up in female dominated households on both sides of my family.
Oh, wow.
So to be more specific, kind of growing up in Black female dominated households, and that intersectional lens is really important because, when considering the labor that many Black women do for their workplace and their community and their family, um, that perspective is important. So while I've been surrounded by a lot of female heroines growing up, there was a noticeable lack of them within the genre. But as Toni Morrison once said, if there's a book that you want to read and it has not been written yet, then you must write it.
Right.
So
Yep.
yeah, I think that kind of motivates everything that I do. I get frustrated when a thing exists for other people, but they don't exist for us. So I'm like, well, where are our Black elves? Where are our Black vampires? Where are our Black space captains? Like, I want it all. And if I don't see it, then it's like, well, I guess I gotta
write it.
So in many ways, it's the lack of like the historical lack of my cultural background in these speculative spaces that, is the drive that keeps me writing. But I also do want to say that I would be remiss not to acknowledge the heroines that did exist, and kind of just express my gratitude for the pioneers, right? Like Octavia Butler.
Mm-hmm.
You have Nichelle Nichols in her role of her in Star Trek. And you have also like the various authors of magical realism. So Zora Neale Hurston, Toni Morrison, and they've been such a dominant force in African American literature. And, for those who are well versed in African American literature, you know that a lot of our touchstone works, like Kindred, Color Purple, Their Eyes Were
Yeah.
Watching God, I Know Why the Cage Bird Sings. All of these are women's stories.
Classics, all classics.
All classics. So from like Phyllis Wheatley to slave narratives, like Black women have always had a powerful voice since the foundation of literature in this country.
Mm-hmm.
So, like us, we're nothing but a descendant of their narratives. Like, they're women's stories. And so that's something I'm always carrying with me into my works as well.
I love that. I'm so glad you brought up that Toni Morrison quote. I love that quote. I was looking at it the other day, and it's funny because every time my husband and I are like, oh man, why don't they ever do a story where it's like this, 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 and this? And I was just like, you know what? We write stories. Let's make it. Like, the story's not there. We want to see it. Well, then let's write it, because that's the only way it's going to get out there as far as we know at this point.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes it's just like, well, we've got to do it ourselves.
Right. I feel so blessed that I did grow up with African American literature, specifically mostly Black women. I mean, it wasn't just, but I definitely have a lot of books by Black women as an
Yeah.
avid reader growing up, and I am so grateful that I was able to have that privilege.
Same. I'm very grateful for the privilege, and I know that's mostly because my immediate family are educators. So like my mom, my grandmother, my aunt, they're all teachers. So
My mother is a teacher. She's a
yeah,
math teacher, but she also encourages literacy.
yeah.
So, in what ways do you believe that your work contributes to the broader representation of Black women in the arts or in media, in books and fantasy, specifically for you, in fantasy? Like,
So yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about kind of the broader representation in regards to publishing, because that's definitely where I have my
ooh,
pulse on the most. And I feel it's
ooh, yes.
also often true that kind of trends start with publishing, only in regards to, it takes a while for movies and video games to be made. So you often see trends start in the writing space, in the book space, and then they're later picked up by movies or later picked up by video games. I do have to shout out to comics as well, because there has been such a great renaissance of Black comics recently that has been very exciting to
Yes.
me. But back kind of in regards to publishing, I'm pretty well versed in Black fantasy, specifically by Black authors. And one thing that I've noticed over the past couple of years is how readily traditional publishing publishes a lot of books about Black pain and Black trauma. Um, and even more specifically, like the excessive amount of violence done to Black women's bodies. Like, one book doesn't alarm me, but I've read multiple now, and it's kind of become a trend to like how much violence Black women receive, even in fantasy books.
Mhm.
And what does that consciously or unconsciously mean for how we value our bodies? And so a lot of these stories are very violent, they're very traumatic. And so it got to a point where I had to say, what about the joy? Like, what
Mhm.
about our laughter? What about our humor? Like, I specifically wrote a book to make us laugh because I wasn't seeing it. And oftentimes, Black joy is radical, and we deserve to
Mhm.
see it more in our media. We deserve to see our bodies respected and honored and loved. We also deserve to see our flaws. So right now, you are seeing a lot more Black anti-heroes in the indie space, because even in our messiness, we deserve to be heroes too. So I
Mhm.
think lately what I've been trying to contribute and consciously contribute to the space is more Black humor, honoring our bodies, and honoring our flaws.
Okay. Yeah, I like that. I definitely love looking at it from a publishing standpoint. I didn't even think about that, but it's so true. And even what you said, and not just books, just media in general, a lot of the time, there's so much Black trauma thrown at us. It's like trauma porn just thrown at us. And it's just like, I don't want to continuously see this. And I've gotten to a point where if I see a trailer and it looks like it's going to be very heavy into the trauma or the mutilation of Black women, or even if I noticed that the entire cast seems to be melaninless,
Mm.
I won't watch it most of the time. There have been some movies that just was like, ah, see that. But but for the most part, if I don't see a single Black person in the trailer, if it looks like it's leaning heavy on trauma, Black trauma, if it's leaning heavy into the disrespect or the mutilation of Black women, I just decide that it's not something that I want to entertain in my mind. I don't want to see it. I, I just want to, it can go whatever, but I won't be watching it. I won't be consuming that media because it's at this point, it's become way too much.
Yeah. Yeah. It is. It's become a lot. And it's like every book I was picking up, I was like, oh. And it's like, why, like, and I don't understand what they have against us, like
Uh,
just joyful books,
it's,
and you do see a lot more of them, especially in the middle grade space. But when you
mhm,
get to YA, when you get to adult, suddenly, we're always dealing with very oppressive themes, with oppression, with trauma. And it's like, but, we deal with more than that. Like,
right.
we're multifaceted.
I think a big part of the problem is actually still that a large percent of books that do have Black characters in them are still not written by Black people.
I agree.
And I
Yeah.
think that's a big problem. A lot of white authors now will smack a Black character on the front because they know that we see that and it appeals to us. And now we're like, oh, I might pick this up.
Yeah.
And it's like,
And even sometimes you do get those books that are written by Black authors, but they
yeah,
might be edited towards the white gaze. And you can
yeah,
tell, wait a minute, this book isn't for me.
no, no. I mean, make your money, honey, I guess, but like, I need some different experiences. I can't live through your trauma every time. Like the few exceptions, which you'll be able to really tell because it'll feel more authentic, is people who went through a trauma
Mhm.
and now they're using this book to kind of express what they went through. Even if it's a fiction, it'd be loosely based off of the stuff they experienced, but you can tell the difference a lot of the time
Yeah, yeah, it's
between
their
that.
way of processing and also helping others to process.
Right. And so those I can deal with. I can support that. But the ones that are definitely geared towards more of the white gaze to be palatable to a white audience, I can't. And so, how do you envision the future of culture expression among Black women in the creative space or in the writing space?
Hmm. So I'm going to be a little honest. Well, I was honest the whole time, but be honest here. Um, so I don't know if I foresee a big proliferation or renaissance among Black women creatives in the future. And I say this because, after George Floyd, you saw a lot of support from traditional publishing, from other organizations about supporting Black authors and supporting Black creatives. But you're
Hmm.
also beginning to see those promises of diversity, equity, and inclusion being pulled back. Like in hindsight, you see that the industry was not beginning to change, but that it was just that we were just a trend.
Hmm.
And you're beginning to see that sort to wane. Like you talk to other authors. I mean, you can see the numbers of who Trad is picking up and how those numbers are starting to decline. Um, and I think back to there was a refinery interview of Robin Lee. I don't know if
Mm.
you've read it or heard about it, but it was about her movie The Idea of You, and it was and so where it talked about she had spent 6 years writing this romance with a Black protagonist, and it had
Hmm.
a white love interest, but even with this Black protagonist, she couldn't sell it. And then she flipped it, made it a white made of two white characters, and immediately it's sold. And
Wow.
we shouldn't have to do that to make
No.
it. I really do want to see more support for the stories that we want to tell, because without that, how genuine and authentic are these stories going to be? I want to see our stories that aren't edited for the white gaze to be successful. That's for us.
Hmm.
I want to see them to be successful. And I want to see the stories from our imagination be as valued as our stories from our lived experiences. And so when you take into consideration the current situation of high inflation rates, high living costs, how hard America makes it for creatives to, just earn a living, despite our passion, despite our determination, despite our perseverance, there are many challenges and there are many obstacles. And, if we want to see a future where there's more varied and greater cultural expressions, then we do really need to support each other. I want to see Black women creatives get their coins.
Hmm.
Support them, invest in them, value them, share them, give them a platform. Or unfortunately, there isn't going to be a future. So, that's why spaces like yours are so important, and why creatives need to support each other. And
Hmm.
I foresee that perhaps more collaboration among Black women creatives across industries. Um, so I'm hoping we get more of that in the future. But I don't know, maybe I'm just being pessimistic, but just talking with people, especially in the media spaces, it's looking hard out there.
Yeah. No, I can 100% see where you're coming from. And this question always gets somehow in there in every season. And I love hearing the different thoughts that people have on it because so far, to be fair, I don't think anybody is wrong. This is why I'm such a proponent of indie spaces, indie authors, indie comics, indie film, indie media in general, because I feel like if we support indie will have a huge come up and we can overtake Hollywood and mainstream. And that is how we have that future.
I
Like you
agree.
said, like Black women coming together across different industries to work together. I wholeheartedly believe that that is not only like the perfect solution, but very doable because I always say, like, in this space, I have yet so far to meet a Black woman who wasn't willing to help out a sister or to work together or to come together and in community. And that, I mean, that's what Black women tend to do. We come together, we push all these things forward most of the time, like we spearhead a lot of this stuff. And so even in this space, I haven't met a woman yet who's like, well, I got this, y'all do you. Everyone's just like, hey, whatever we can do to come together, work together and figure something out, I'm with it. Just let me know. And it's beautiful, the sisterhood that we actually do amongst each other. Like, it's not that, oh yeah, women support women on the white feminism,
Yeah.
where it's like, yeah, to a certain extent, and we definitely don't include the women of color in that. I
Yeah.
have seen nothing but genuine support from everyone else I know in this community.
I agree. Just that community support, we need it. Because as I said, those other bigger folks,
Mm-mm.
they're not going to do it.
And I mean, let's not forget that they are literally intentionally leaving millions of dollars out just so they can exclude us.
And it's,
Don't y'all like money? I thought the whole point was you loved capitalism and you wanted money. I don't, what?
yeah, it's like,
Did you hate
it's
us
right
more than you
there.
like money?
It's right there.
I don't I don't understand. Are there any projects or initiatives you're blah 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 blah? I'm sorry. Are there any projects or initiatives that you're involved in that aim to preserve or celebrate cultural heritage through creativity?
Yes. So I'm currently working and doing some work with the Melanin Library. I don't know if you've before?
She's actually the reason I heard of your book.
Oh.
Yep.
Perfect. Yeah. So for our viewers, the Melanin Library is a website. It's a database of all books, whether indie or trad, published by Black authors. And so, if you don't know if that book with a Black character on the cover is written by a white person or a Black person, you can go check it with the Melanin Library.
Let's go there, please.
Yeah. So if you're looking for a book by Black authors, just a great resource because especially as we had said before, supporting indies, a lot of people don't know where to start with indie books or how to find indie books, and that is a great resource to go and say, hey, I'm looking for Black indie in this genre that I already read, and to kind of be able to go connect your taste and go and find them. So we're currently actually working on an anthology, getting together some authors together to help support the library and to keep this resource available to readers. So that's what I'm currently working on, and we'll see how it goes. But hopefully,
really cool.
We'll see the light of day next year.
Oh, I'm sure it will. I'm sure it will. That's really cool. I like that. I love anthologies. I grew up reading Chicken Soup for the Soul, so I think that's what really got me hooked into anthologies, was reading that growing up.
Yeah, it's really cool just to read like different short stories by different authors, and you're like, oh, that was really good. I haven't heard about them before, and it
Right.
Inspires you to go check out more of their works.
It really does. So what advice would you give other Black women who are exploring cultural heritage in their work, and how to just, create things and still keep it culturally relevant?
I would say fuck the rules.
Yeah.
And like, to give a specific example here, the use of AAV is often looked down upon within the fantasy genre. Like, readers often complain that it's unrealistic. It takes them out of the story, that is not realistic. But if we're being honest with ourselves, when we're reading these fantastical stories that are based off of medieval Europe, they aren't written in they're written
Old English.
in modern English, not
Right.
medieval English. Like, they are written how language they aren't written how language was spoken back then. So
Right.
what's
At
real?
best, they have an English accent. That's about it.
Exactly. So what's realistic is simply a trapping of the genre decided by old white men. And, they are essentially translations written for modern audiences today. So with that in mind, it's like, well, why can't I write in a more relatable way for my target audience? So I definitely recommend to always challenge what's taken for granted. What are seen as these immutable rules, and really consider who benefits from those criticisms and who are being pushed out by those criticisms. Just challenge everything, because white supremacy is insidious. And the more you deconstruct, the more freedom you have to explore. So as creatives, we find that the world is constantly trying to limit us and limit our art. But in the end, art and fantasy should be limitless.
You really should. And guys, rules were meant to be broken. I saw a video earlier today, and I can't remember what they said, basically about, screw the rules. The rules are made up, or, not right, something like that. I can't remember what the video was now. I know it was a lady, and she was skating on a tennis court with a tennis racket in her hand. And it was a really cool video, but I can't remember exactly what she said. But essentially, rules are made to be broken, guys.
Yes.
Especially in arts. Like, there are rules in art, like even with drawing, there are rules to drawing so that you can learn, but then you're supposed to break the rules so that you can find your own voice and your own style. So, like, that's the best way to do it. Find the rules, learn the rules, break the rules.
Yes.
We're all rebels here.
Yes.
So we have come to the point of the show where we do one really interesting fact about a woman in comics. And today is a personal favorite of mine, as an adamant follower of this organization. Regina Sawyer, who is the owner of Lock It Down Productions, which is a company that employs all female comic book artists with an emphasis on women of color, is also the founder of Women in Comics, the NYC Collective International. And I always tell y'all to research, but like you can find both Lock It Down Productions and Women in Comics NYC Collective literally like right there on social media. I follow both of these, so I know y'all can find them. So that is our fact for the day. Our creative challenge will for this season will be to create a piece of art that is culturally relevant to you. And of course, at the end of the season with the big round table is where I will share everybody's submissions for the creative challenge. So, do your best, work hard, but remember it's culturally relevant to you. So, no one else has to understand it for it to be beautiful art. And of course, now I'm going to let Tatiana, if you could share where everyone can find you, website, social media, and all that stuff. I'll let you go ahead and take the floor.
So my website is TatianaObey.com. And I can be found on all social media at a play on my name at Obey the Author. On all of them, TikTok, X, Instagram, Threads, all all the ones. And so yeah, I hope to see you guys.
And what do I always say? Follow these people and buy the book. Please, you will not be disappointed. But of course, you can also find us at midnightcomics.org or everywhere as Midnight X Comics, except for Facebook and YouTube, where it's just Midnight Comics. Or if you're looking for just me, you can find me official_TOSHIJ everywhere except for Facebook and YouTube, where it's TashiJ89. And I hope you enjoyed this episode of Melanin Minds with our awesome, awesome guest. And I will see you guys in the next episode.